Hi guys, Matthew from Warrior Pilgrim, and as you can see, I'm dressed in, you could say, the outfit I want to try somewhat. I'm wearing my long coat, I'm wearing my cloak, I'm wearing my hat. Firstly, I want to try it because, well, as I'm pretty sure you're aware, the buckle of my cloak, or the clasp, can bite into my neck, so I'm trying to see if the collar of my coat will stop it from doing that. Also, I've always wanted to try sort of the triple layer effect of the coat and the cloak, because as you can see, my coat has a bit of a caplet to it, as does my cloak. So I wondered how well they'll do together. But an army hood as well, that would make it even more interesting. Just need to pull the main bit of the cloak over my shoulder. There we go. But I'm also on my hockey stick, so I thought whilst I was doing this and testing out the insulation effect, which is actually pretty good, even though at the moment I'm just in the garage, I also want to talk about something. I covered it briefly in a video about archery, but I haven't bothered to upload that yet. I might end up doing it, I don't know. But the main thing is, some people have been talking about how to interpret the Bible, or in different ways, or the fact that because it is translated in different ways, it is therefore wrong. Or the way they put it, only a lie has multiple versions. Unfortunately, that falls into two traps. Firstly, there are actually multiple versions of different things, that doesn't necessarily make them false. And furthermore, when you get to the Bible, those are translations. So naturally people will translate them differently. In fact, some people even paraphrase the Bible in ridiculous ways that is clearly not how they're meant to be interpreted. But quite possibly, according to them, it is easy enough. The classic example is you're allowed to beat your slave as long as they don't die. That's not actually what the Bible says, and the interpretation is clearly that you shouldn't beat your slave at all. If you kill them, you pay a fine. If you don't kill them, you have to make sure they are nursed back to health. You beat them until they die, you're done for. If you beat them and they don't die, you must give them sufficient time to recover. And that is going to cost you. It's not about saying that you can beat your slaves, it's saying that you shouldn't at all. So that shows just because one person interprets it that way doesn't necessarily mean the entire thing is false. You may say, well, there's nothing else like that. There are actually. The fighting manuals. Often people in the old days just swung a sword and learned how to wield it as it was. But in the Renaissance, some people were trying to train people up in methods of wielding weapons. Classic ones are Joachim Meyer, Hans Talhoffer, and Fiore, who was an Italian swordsman. He wrote Flora Battaglia, The Flower of Battle. Now, interestingly enough, if you study them, you can see that both the German longswordsmen and the Italian longsword have remarkably similar techniques. You have the stances, such as Von Tag, Long Point, Flug, and Ux, which altogether make up the stances that, but there are hundreds of stances really. I tend to use the primary ones such as Ux, Flug, Von Tag, Langort, and Ulva. Interestingly enough, though, and I think this might help show off that, this Regalia, some of them are remarkably similar to stances used in the Japanese fighting styles. Now, yes, Japan has several other weapons, and you see that throughout European swordsmanship as well. But even the katana, which this can represent, as I often use it as, even that has remarkably similar fighting techniques based off it. or at the very least, positions from which they start. I don't remember the names of the stances, but there are things like high guard, overhead guard. You have a middle guard, you have a low guard, and there's even a long pointed guard. So there's so many. You can even hold it up like so, and yes, that'll be the back edge hanging over, or on the edge. So it's all too easy. And like I said, there isn't just one Japanese fighting style. There is Kendo, there's also Iaido, Yaijutsu, Kenjutsu, I think Aikido has a bladed aspect. Karate, no, because that was deliberately a non-weapon based fighting style. They would use other things, like maybe a staff or sais, but those are just farming tools that anyone can pick up. Anything that was overtly a weapon, like a sword, a spear, an axe, no. So, realistically, you can train someone in all weapons of Europe and East Asia just by using those stances to start off with. So you can train someone who had only ever wielded a katana by showing them the opening stances using a falchion or even a longsword. And sooner or later, they'll get the gist of it. And the rest is just a matter of figuring out which weapon works best for them. And that is the thing. If you have something that you can relate to, it's easy to transfer it over. The same is true of archery. I'm an archery instructor, I'm allowed to talk about that, but it's not necessarily the same thing here. With archery, you start with a light bow, like the jelly bows that I've got here. Then you'll start building up. It's an expensive hobby to start off with, as always, but once you get to a point where you can swing a weapon, you can shoot a bow at pretty much any weight, you get to the point where your muscles need to use something else. And that is where you step over into mastery. The war bows could be up to £180 sometimes. Joe Gibbs, a fabulous archer who I did actually see quite recently at time of recording, shoot a compound bow for the first time in many years. He said he had to basically rejig his entire shooting style because I actually had to grab one of my bows for this. Hold up. This is my flat bow. Now, not going to shoot anything in here, but with a flat bow and most long bows, you would simply point, pull back, keep it as straight as possible. This is a £40 bow, so it's fairly easy to do that. However, as you can see, I'm generally fairly linear, squaring off, side onto the target, arm out straight. Everything's in the way here as well, so I need to cast this back over my shoulders. And then we can pull. As you can see, my hands just supporting it like so. However, Joe Gibbs, he would step back 1 foot, lean forward as well. That would engage all of his back muscles. And here's the thing, he wasn't taught that. He worked it out. He figured it out himself. He let his body do the rest. And he would start with attention, well, I'll do mine a little bit. And he really brings it out like so. Now I can feel most of the back muscles doing the work, and they're not too hard to hold it back here. Longer than my natural draw length. I'm getting all the muscles, sticking my backside out, leaning forwards, engaging all the muscles. So that way I can pull all the way back. And I haven't trained that, so that's all the muscles in the back doing the work. Shows how good they are. If I do train that method constantly, sooner or later, I will be able to pull a £160 bow by Joe Gibbs. But probably not on the regular, because I don't go down the archery range that much. What does that tell you? It tells you that sooner or later, there's something else that takes over. You had the basic training, the basic thoughts, you had the basic principles. And they may vary subtly from situation to situation. But ultimately, they will come to the same thing. They will come to similar ways of performing. And that's the thing I like to bring forward. Many people think that religions are totally different. And therefore, if God wanted us to understand, he's done a pretty bad job. I'd say it entirely depends on how humans respond to God. And then they alter themselves. Metal hasn't always been universally available. Let's be honest about that. But they used other tools as well. Every culture has at some point used flint, and eventually they moved on to iron and steel. Did they all bring out the same weapon? No. Did those weapons somehow connect to a similar way of fighting? They did. And that's the thing. They can come from vastly different situations, vastly different backgrounds, vastly different geology. But they can connect in remarkable ways when it gets right down to it. So if you want to try disproving God, first of all, look at the things that connect the religions. And don't try and divide us any further. So remember to look at that stuff. Stay safe, and God be with you, my friends.